Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's Danny Dhaiphong. Welcome to another stream. As you can tell, I'm still a bit under the weather, but my day has actually gone a little better because, as you can see, I am joined by Dr. Norman Finkelstein. Dr. Finkelstein is a political scientist, prolific author. He's the son of Holocaust survivors, and he talks about Israel's latest attack on Gaza and debunks the most pervasive talking points used to justify Israel's ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Dr. Finkelstein, welcome to the program. I really appreciate having you on.
Well, it's always my pleasure to be on with Billy Hanoi.
Yes, we were talking about the name that I have adopted, my pseudonym. But Dr. Finkelstein, you've been on a lot of programs of late. So I wanted to actually first, before I get your analysis on what's going on in Gaza, play a little bit from our friend Barack Obama, because you have actually been talking about, you have a book about woke culture, cancel culture, and I wanted to kind of blend these things together because a lot of the points that Barack Obama made in a Pod Save America appearance are the talking points I feel like are being pushed on us now that the United States finds itself in a quandary with Israel. Blinken was in Tel Aviv late last week, and there's a lot of talk about humanitarian pauses. And so I wanted to play this. I'm just going to pull it up. It's only a couple minutes. Please do tap out if you feel like you want to say something. I'll pause the video because it is 3 minutes long. But when you want to respond, please do just
if
indicate
there's
this.
any chance,
and I'm going to just play it now. And here we go.
If there's any chance of us being able to act constructively to do something, it will require an admission of complexity and maintaining what on the surface may seem contradictory ideas. That what Hamas did was horrific and there's no justification for it. And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. And what is also true is that there is a history of the Jewish people that may be dismissed unless your grandparents or your great-grandparents or your uncle or your aunt tell you stories about the madness of anti-Semitism. And what is true is that there are people right now who are dying who have nothing to do with what Hamas did. And what is true, right? I mean, we can go on for a while. And the problem with the social media and trying to TikTok activism and trying to debate this on that is you can't speak the truth. You can pretend to speak the truth. You can speak one side of the truth. And in some cases, you can try to maintain your moral innocence, but that won't solve the problem. And so if you want to solve the problem, then you have to take in the whole truth. And you then have to admit nobody's hands are clean, that all of us are complicit to some degree.
I'm actually going to stop it there because I think it's a perfect place to stop, given he talks about complicity. Dr. Finkelstein, your reaction.
My first reaction is I wish he would stop rolling up his sleeves, because he hasn't been a community organizer for about 40 years. And even when he was a community organizer, it was for about 2.5 years. And he just became a community organizer to pad his resume so he can get into Harvard Law School. So that's my first reaction. My second reaction is actually what he says is true. I'm not going to dispute that. But there's no bottom line. It's just this is true and that's true and this is true and that's true, and it doesn't get us anywhere. It just it's a laundry list. It is also true that in the Israel-Palestine conflict, there is always a question about where does one begin. Israelis want to go back 2,000 years ago to stake their claim on the basis of the fact that they were, quote unquote, there first. And then others want to say, what about the 2,000 years that elapsed before the Zionist movement began in the end of the 19th century? So there's always a question of, to quote the title of a book by Edward Said, there's always the question of beginnings. Where do you begin? And it is true that depending on where you begin, there's a certain amount of partisanship. So rather than where to begin, I think probably a better thing to do is, where did things end on October 7th? The protocol right now in the news media is everything began on October 7th. But in fact, October 7th wasn't the beginning. October 7th was the climax. It was the climax of a people being immured in a concentration camp for 20 years. And all of the despair, all of the despondency, all of the depression, combined with all of the accumulated rage and fury of not only a life, your own life destroyed, but during Israel's periodic massacres, high-tech massacres in Gaza, there was a lot of death and destruction. In fact, two of the main massacres in Gaza occurred in the first one, which I'll get to in a moment, under Barack Obama's indirect watch. And the second one, the second main massacre, occurred under Barack Obama's full watch, direct watch. So I referred to the fact a moment ago, which I'm going to reiterate, because it's the crucial fact to bear in mind. Beginning in 2006, a brutal, inhumane, illegal blockade on Gaza was imposed. Nobody can go in, nobody can go out. 70% of the population of Gaza comprises refugees and the descendants of refugees. That is, people who were expelled from what became the State of Israel in 1948, and their descendants. That's 70% of the population of Gaza. They live in refugee camps, like the one that Israel dropped 2,000-pound bombs on a couple of days ago, Jabalia camp. Now, half the population of Gaza comprises children, about 1,100,000 of the people in Gaza who are presently on the receiving end of this high-tech genocidal assault in Gaza are children. So, this population has been immured in this concentration camp. About one half the population suffers from what's called severe food insecurity. One half of the population is unemployed. 60% of the youth are unemployed. And beyond all the despair, despondency, depression that this situation induces, Gaza is among the most densely populated places on God's earth. It's 25 miles long, less than the length of a marathon, and it's 5 miles wide. For those of you who live in New York City, it's the distance from NYU to Columbia University. Now, on top of that, as I said, the fact that the people of Gaza have no past. The young folks who broke through the gates of Gaza, most of them were born in Gaza concentration camp. They're about 18, 20 years old. They were born in Gaza concentration camp. In 2008-9, December 26th, till January 17th, Israel launched the first of its major, it's launched numerous murderous operations on Gaza. I can't even commit to memory the names because there are just so many. But on Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9 was the first large-scale massacre, relatively speaking. Even the small ones were big massacres, but relatively speaking, Operation Cast Lead was quantitatively in a different category. Israel killed about 1,400 Palestinians, 350 of them children. Now, that date may sound familiar to you because Israel broke the ceasefire with Hamas on November 4th, 2008, because that was election day, and all the cameras were focused on the election of the first purportedly Black president in American history. Now, when the fighting began, Israel broke the ceasefire on November 4th, and then full-scale fighting began December 26th. Barack Obama was already president-elect. He didn't say anything while Gaza was being systematically, methodically destroyed, except when, when he said something? There's a juxtaposition between January 17th, when the Israeli high-tech massacre ended, and January 20th. January 20th was inauguration. So when Barack Obama was about to be officially inaugurated as president, he told Israel to stop because he didn't want any distractions in Gaza. And that's when Israel stopped. He could have said it 2 days earlier. He could have said it 3 days earlier. But this stupefying narcissist, the only thing he cared about, was the election, the inauguration, his anointment. Now, come 2014, I'm skipping various massacres. In 2014, there was another high-tech massacre on a much larger scale, an Operation Cast Lead. It was called Operation Protective Edge. It ran from July 8th to August 26th, 51 days. Israel killed about 2,200 Palestinians, of whom 550 were children. And every day, Saint Barak went before the cameras and said Israel has a right to defend itself, allowing for that second, much larger high-tech massacre. Israel destroyed 18,000 civilian homes. I mean, right now, it's of a totally different magnitude. Already, Israel has destroyed about half of the homes in Gaza. The last estimate I read was 43% have been, gone, vanished in thin air, vaporized. So that was the life, in quotation marks, that the people of Gaza lived. And so what happened, and there was no possibility anything would change. For the past 3 years, Gaza, the Palestine issue completely disappeared from the news. All the talk, all the punditry was about this deal between Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Israel that would normalize relations. And once relations were normalized, the Palestine question would be effectively liquidated. That was the hope, that was the expectation, that the people of Gaza in particular would just be left to languish and die in this concentration camp. And so what happened on October 7th was the climax and the culmination of this process of trying to liquidate, contain the Palestine question, the Gaza question, by confining these people. David Cameron, the Conservative Prime Minister of the UK, called it an open-air prison. Baruch Kimmerling, the Hebrew University scholar, called it a concentration camp. Actually, I just learned today from an email that leading Israeli officials called it a concentration camp, called Gaza a concentration camp. I'll be using that in the coming weeks. I just have to confirm everything. And so on October 7th, a constituent element of the people of Gaza engaged in a slave revolt. And anyone who knows the history of slave revolts in the US, in Haiti, slave revolts are very ugly affairs. Now, exactly what happened on that day, I think we can say two things. Number one, atrocities of a significant magnitude occurred. But number two, there are still many gray areas. Were there actual beheadings of children? Were there rapes? And how many of the people were killed not by Hamas militants outright, but in the course of crossfire and firefights? We don't know the answers to those questions just yet, but I'm willing to acknowledge atrocities occurred, and atrocities have occurred across the history of slave revolts in the United States. the Nat Turner Revolt, which is the largest slave revolt in our history. Nat Turner gave the order to his group, kill all whites. That was the order. And they did behead babies. That's not problematic. And obviously it's not something to celebrate, though it should be noted that the Nat Turner Rebellion currently, in our current cultural moment, it occupies a respected place in American history. So that, I think, is the important corrective. Barack Obama it's Barack Obama. He doesn't say anything. He's such a zero that he's a -1. The only place where I've studied him quite closely in a book I just wrote. I devoted about 150 pages to his presidency. The only thing he seemed to have any kind of real facility in was basketball, and he did know the game. He does know the game. But once you get past the basketball court, you might as well talk to an avocado.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I've written extensively on him too, and his legacy of being a more effective evil for the war machine. And he certainly, when he says he has blood, maybe has blood on his hands or complicity in this, and what's going on now with regards to Palestine, surely he does have complicity in it.
Well, he clearly had the power to stop it.
Right.
He told them January 17th, stop, my inauguration is coming. And they stopped.
Yes. And you mentioned the language, and how controversial language becomes when we talk about Palestine. You referenced concentration camp with regard to Gaza. I was watching you on a podcast, Comedy Sellers podcast, where you were talking or debating with Eli Lake of the Daily Beast. And when you use the term mowing the lawn or mowing the grass, there was a woman, I don't know who she was. I don't
She
even know.
worked for the program, absolutely
Right.
possible.
Right. But she got really upset by that term. She said it's
you know what? That just shows that she's a real human being. You
exactly.
should get upset. Because of the 2,300 blades of grass in Gaza, half of them are children. And yet that phrase is just thrown around like it's just so cute and so clever and so funny. And she actually was in a state of denial. Like, I don't believe that people could say that. And it's perfectly plausible that she didn't know.
Right.
You know, you have to follow the conflict, even though it's a commonplace, but still you have to follow the conflict. It is a shocking term. And
Definitely.
the point I made was, if you take the case of Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, and you look at the figures, roughly speaking, Israel says 1,400 people were killed by Hamas militants. 1,400 Palestinians were killed in Operation Cast Lead. If you look at the number of combatants versus civilians on October 7th versus Cast Lead, they're roughly the same. So I said, how would people react if Hamas said, we were just mowing the lawn? I mean, people would not be able to contain their outrage and indignation. This would be proof positive of what human animals they are. And yet Israelis just casually use that phrase. So it's to her credit that she was shocked by the term and was in part in denial about the use of the term. Like, I never heard of it. So I credit her for that.
And what I wanted to ask you was, could you talk about how Israel uses this term? When did they start using this term? And is this current operation part of this
No,
process? Because it feels the magnitude, as you said, is so large when it comes to what's
this
happening now.
current operation is qualitatively different. This is not mowing the lawn. This is an attempt at a cross between annihilation and ethnic cleansing.
Right.
If they had their choice, just because of PR, not because they care a whit about the life of any Palestinian, but if they had the choice, they would want to expel them all into the Sinai. Why have to bear the stigma of having exterminated a population? They wouldn't care. I mean, they care as much about the population as Americans did during the so-called Indian Wars. You're just exterminating savages. So they wouldn't have cared, but because there is an international community to whom you're technically accountable, though Israel has never been held legally accountable, but technically they're accountable. There are so-called laws of war, there are international treaties, there are international covenants, and so forth. And also Israel likes to, it calls itself a civilized power in a jungle. They're living in the jungle, namely the other Arab world. They would prefer not to exterminate them. So their goal would be ethnic cleansing, to expel them all into the Egyptian Sinai via the Rafah border crossing. But in the absence of that, I would say it's still unclear what they're going to do. As I said already, Gaza is among the most densely populated places on earth. They've emptied out the northern half of Gaza, which means among the most densely populated places on earth is now double. The density has doubled because the whole population from the northern sector has been forced into the southern sector. And it's quite clear that Israel is going to annex large parts of the northern sector and call it its new security zone, or they call it buffer zone, sometimes security zone. So what they're going to do with those people, I haven't a clue. Their current plans are clearly genocidal. It's not even controversial, actually. If you just add up the statements, President Herzog said there is no distinction between civilians and combatants. Defense Minister Gallant said there will be no water, food, electricity, or fuel admitted to Gaza. And Prime Minister Netanyahu said this was going to be their longest operation. Well, Protective Edge lasted 51 days. So if you add up those three statements, what do you get? For 51 plus days, there'll be no food, water, electricity, or fuel admitted to any of the population of Gaza. That's a murder plan. That's not complicated. That's what we might call simple addition. Take those three statements, add them up. And now, Noam Dworman said, can't you forgive what people say in the heat of anger? They made these statements on October 8th. And that certainly would be a reasonable argument. The problem is we're 3 weeks later and they're implementing that plan. It's not, they're implementing the plan. They're not letting in fuel, water, food, or electricity. And they're not making, clearly from the bombing, they're not making any distinctions between civilians and combatants. Right now, about 3,500 children have been killed. That's more than the number of children killed in every war zone in the world in 2020, 2021, 2022. Take for all the children killed in every war zone in the year 2020, in every war zone in the year 2021, in every war zone the year 2022, in each of those years, more children in Gaza have been killed than for the whole of 2020, 21, 22. Yeah, that's a fact. So the fellow I was technically debating, though it really wasn't a debate, it was more like child abuse, because he didn't know anything. You know,
He said nothing. Yes, it's true. He said nothing.
he sneeringly said, "Well, does that include Ukraine?" Well, actually, it's an interesting statistic. In 20 months in the Ukraine, 20 months in Ukraine, 500 kids have been killed. In 3 weeks in Gaza, 3,500 have been killed. It's a murder plan. So I can't say what the end game is going to be because Egypt is being adamant about not opening the Rafah border because it doesn't want the Palestinians to come into its country and create new troubles for Sisi, who already President Sisi, who already has major problems, primary among them economic. So you can't keep them there because the density of the population is going to double, and it's already among the most densely populated. Or just kill them off by starvation. I don't know. I can't tell you what the answer is there. I don't believe Hamas has the military capacity to prevent a utter military annihilation. And Hezbollah, the party of God in Lebanon, has indicated that it's not going to do much. Not that it could do much, but it's clear it can't. So I think there's every reason to be very pessimistic about what's going to happen. And I'm not going to give false grounds for hope.
Speaking of Hamas, you have probably witnessed. I know you saw Gilad Erdan show off the Star of David and compare the plight of the Israelis to the persecution committed by the Nazis, and there's a lot of Hamas equals Nazis comparisons going on. I wanted to pull up an article. I don't know if you're familiar with this historian, Dr. Finkelstein, Mr. Andrew Roberts, but he wrote an article in the Telegraph, which is an abhorrent article, but on October 30th. And I wanted to read just the last few paragraphs of it shortly and have you react to it, because I'm noticing, especially among Israel's biggest sympathizers, this is the narrative that's being peddled. He says, just as Hamas is using roadblocks to prevent Palestinians from moving south and away from Israeli attack on northern Gaza, so it is also preventing Palestinians from moving on from the utterly doomed hope of retaking the land of Israel. While the vast majority of displaced peoples of the late 1940s have eschewed the path of violence, instead choosing peacefully to try to advance their national stories and make the best of their circumstances, getting their revenge by working hard, living well, and being happy, the Gazans voted for Hamas in 2006. The Palestinians have thus become willing dupes of a cynical policy of foreign countries to use them to pressurize and destabilize the world's sole Jewish state. Were each Arab state to take 100,000 Palestinians, fewer than the number of Ukrainians that Britons welcomed in, then Gazans would be safe. But that would mean a safer Israel, which is not what some Arab states want. Until the Palestinians are finally able to accommodate themselves to the fact that Israel is here to stay, they can never find contentment. And then the end of the article goes, Benjamin Netanyahu's best reply to those demanding a ceasefire before Israel can destroy Hamas ought to be that of his hero, Winston Churchill, who on 14th of July, 1941 said, "We ask no favors of our enemy. We seek from them no compunction. On the contrary, if tonight the people of London were asked to cast their vote whether a convention should be entered into to stop the bombing of all cities, the overwhelming majority would cry, no, we mete out to the Germans the more the measure that they have meted out to us." So, Dr. Finkelstein, this is something that I'm hearing a lot, this comparison, Hamas to Nazis, and this is sort of a soliloquy to that. your take, your reaction to this narrative that's being bandied about.
In 2006, January 6th, I think, 2006, there were elections held in the occupied Palestinian territories, the West Bank and Gaza. Those elections were in large part in response to a demand made by George Bush. That was the era of what you might recall as democracy promotion. You remember that era in the Bush administration. So one of the exemplary cases of democracy promotion was calling for elections in the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, the Palestinian Authority, the current administration in the West Bank, was hopelessly corrupt. And so the Palestinians, in these parliamentary elections, handed over a victory to Hamas because Hamas had a reputation for being honest. I'm not saying that reputation continued afterwards, but at the time, they had a vast social service network, then the mosques, and then in general, they lived a austere life. For example, I remember when I visited, I don't know if he was the head of Hamas at that time. He may not have been, but one of the leaders of Hamas, Dr. Rantisi, in Gaza, I met him. And whatever you thought of him, there's no question that he lived a very austere, simple life. For those of us, which doesn't include you, who have memories of the tenements in the 1930s, it was like a tenement where he lived. In any event, they won the elections. They had a political party arm of the movement, and they ran on a reform platform. And Gazans, to my thinking perfectly rationally, they voted for Hamas because it was the better alternative to the Palestinian Authority. And there were basically only two options at the time, not unlike our own Democratic and Republican Party, two basic options. And Hamas at the time, began putting forth quite reasonable proposals for trying to resolve the question with Israel. Some of the proposals, I always forget the Arabic term. What's the Arabic term for a 30-year truce? There's a specific term for that, a truce. And then there were also proposals to settle the question on the basis of what's called the international consensus, the global consensus for solving it, namely 2 states and the June 1967 border and so forth. But all of those proposals were rebuffed by the Israel and by the United States. And instead, the US and Israel imposed that brutal blockade on Gaza. Now, there were periods where Gaza was actually doing okay. For example, the period roughly 2010 to 12, I can't go into now why they were doing okay, but the economy seemed to be doing okay. And what did Israel do? It was appalled by the fact that Hamas was normalizing its condition and also normalizing its relations with various countries, Qatar, Turkey. And so Israel, as always, it provoked another exchange of a armed exchange, and then it went in and it launched what was called Operation Pillar of Defense. Basically, Israel wouldn't accept anything other than what it had established in the West Bank, namely a subservient, or what's called a subcontractor, namely the Palestinian Authority. But they were always committed to not allowing for a real Palestinian state in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. And by that time, once this experience had played itself out, the Hamas became very hardened to any possibility of a settlement on the terms of the international consensus. And they said they weren't going to travel down the same path as the Palestinian Authority. to just become new subcontractors for Israel, not in the West Bank, but this time in Gaza.
Yeah. Thank you for that. No, that's I think that's really helpful context. And I just wanted
Another point I would make, I have
yes.
to watch the time.
Okay.
The other point I would make is this whole question of resettling of the Palestinians in Arab countries. And we have to be honest about these things. Yes, in theory, that is a possibility. But you then have to ask yourself the question, if the people want to stay, it's their home now. They were expelled in 1948. It's now 75 years later. It's where they established their home, their lives, their neighbors, their friends, marriages, and so forth. If the people want to stay, should we, in the interest of expediency, tell them they should leave? So let's take an example from our own American history. Beginning in like the 1820s, roughly, I don't have a precise timetable, when the question of what to do with the slaves came up. So there are people who advocated the emancipation of the slaves. This included Lincoln. Advocated the emancipation of the slaves, but on one condition: they had to leave. That Lincoln was convinced of the fact that blacks and whites couldn't live together, and so there were all of these colonization schemes. And then there were blacks who said there was no possibility, no future of black people in the United States, and therefore they should go to Africa. So there were colonization schemes by those who supported emancipation, but emancipation with colonization. And that was among whites, and there were emancipation schemes among blacks, which, well, they wouldn't be emancipated, they would just be, as it were, they would leave. And then there were people like Frederick Douglass and abolitionists who said no, they should have the right to be here and be emancipated. So you have to ask yourself the question, was Douglass wrong? Were the abolitionists wrong? Were those who advocated colonization? Because it's true. Just think for a moment. If blacks had gone to Haiti, which is what people like Lincoln advocated, if American blacks were emancipated and then shipped off to Haiti, or if they went to Africa, just think about how that would have solved the problem. We wouldn't have had a civil war. 700,000 Americans wouldn't have been killed. Then we wouldn't have had all the history of 200 years of racial conflict, because this is 1820, 1920, 220. So we have we wouldn't have had George Floyd. We wouldn't have had race riots. We wouldn't have had explosions in ghettos. So, should we say those who said black people should stay, should we say they were wrong? Expediency, pragmatism would seem to weigh on the side of they should have left. But how many people would say that now? How many people would say the colonization schemes were the right thing? How many people would say emancipation and the right to vote and equal rights was the wrong thing? Because that's what you're telling the Palestinians. You're telling them they shouldn't stay and fight for their rights where they are. They should leave. And that will, as this author says, simplify the problem.
Yes, it's truly an expression of just eradicate the Palestinian population from Palestine. That's essentially what he's arguing.
Ethnically cleanse it and let them go live with their Arab brothers and sisters, just like we said, or those who advocate the colonization schemes, let them go live with their brothers and sisters in Africa or in the Caribbean.
Yes, yes, indeed. Dr. Finkelstein, I know I only have a few more minutes with you. I wanted to just get your quick reaction to uh, the
Please,
position.
not another Barack Obama,
No, no, no.
unless
No,
unless his sleeves aren't rolled up, then maybe I can handle it for 30 seconds.
no. This is a question about the position the United States is in because we had Blinken in Tel Aviv. There was reports that the U.S. is trying to get Israel to stop killing so many Palestinians, and it seems quite clear that Netanyahu and the Israeli regime has rebuffed the United States.
I
What
don't.
do you make of all this?
I find that very implausible.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. What do you make of it?
No, there are two U.S. Aircraft carriers now in the Mediterranean. The Congress has just voted $14 billion more to this country, which seems to have it's bottomless in its receivership of U.S. monies. Israel just suffered one of the worst humiliating intelligence catastrophes, not just in its history, but all of modern history. So it's not in a position to say no to the United States. That's just ridiculous. It's just theater where Netanyahu can play tough. He stood up to the Americans. It's good on election day. And the United States can say, well, we tried, but we couldn't do anything. Of course, you could do something.
It is an election year. It is an election year. And I don't know if you saw the protests today, Dr. Finkelstein, quite large around the world. I think there are 300,000 in Washington. And there's already murmurs that what's happening in Palestine is going to affect Joe Biden because there are a significant number of people who are sympathetic to Palestine, especially in the Arab community, who are not happy with this.
I'm not optimistic about that. It's going to the Democratic Party is just going to play the Donald Muslim ban, Trump versus the Joe lift the Muslim ban, Biden, and he will carry the day. And also, people's memories are very short. If Israel completes its annihilation in the next 2 months, it won't affect election day, in my opinion.
Dr. Finkelstein, I know you said you had a hard stop at 50 minutes, so we are almost there. If there's anything that you'd like to share with the audience before you head out, I will give you the floor before I tell you goodbye.
Well, the fact of the matter is most causes are lost causes. Might 9 times out of 10 prevails over right. But even when a cause is hopeless, you have a moral obligation to try to do something because you don't know for certain that the cause is hopeless. I remember Professor Chomsky, who has as good a grasp on politics as anybody out there. I remember the years when he was saying that the East Timor cause was hopeless. He just thought it was pointless. He obviously gave his all to it, but he thought it was hopeless. And to his surprise, the cause actually was won with East Timor. So number one, you never know whether a cause is hopeless. Though in retrospect, you could say 9 out of 10 fail. Actually, I would say 99 out of 100. Anybody who's lived as long as me, and luckily for you, you haven't. Anyone who's lived as long as me For every 99 workers you know who were shafted for no good reason, maybe one will win in a NLRB, National Labor Relations Board arbitration. Maybe one will win. 99 won't win. My building, we've had 6 porters in the last 2 years. A lot of them, I think, lost their job for no good reason, in my opinion. But they're never going to win. You don't have the money to go to court with a landlord. It's just ridiculous. So most causes lose, in my opinion. But you never know which one might win if you put your thumb on one side of the scale. And the other thing is, you don't join causes because they're going to win. You join causes because it's the right thing to do. I think Professor Chomsky liked to quote this saying from Confucius: the sign of a good person is somebody who continues in the cause knowing it's hopeless. And I think there is something to be said about that. I can't remember the exact quote, and since you're of Asian descent, you could probably track it down sooner than me. But it's persisting even in the knowledge that it's hopeless. So I think those are 2 grounds. The first ground is a pragmatic one. You don't know whether this is a hopeless cause until it does or doesn't prove to be hopeless. And the other one is just a matter of conscience. The conscience tells you just can't go on with business as usual when people are being annihilated. So those were, even though I'm not going to open up any false hopes, I don't believe in that. I believe that you treat adults like adults. Namely, if you don't think it looks good, you tell them that. So I'm not going to rouse false hopes, but I still think even in the absence of giving a inspiring speech to your listeners, those 2 considerations weigh heavily enough on the side of doing something. One, maybe doing something will do something. And 2, for a decent human being, you're not physically able to go on with business as usual when a horror is unfolding before your eyes.
Well said. Well said. It reminds me, I was just in Vietnam. It reminds me of Vietnam. It took many people think Vietnam War, 10, 15 years when the United States was in it, but actually the Vietnamese were dealing with colonialism for decades upon decades upon
Yeah.
decades, many hopeless years. No one, and it wasn't predictable whether they could win and gain their liberation. And so it's, it's a long, hard struggle. And what matters is that we definitely stand up for what is right, regardless of whether the future says victory or not, and whether we can see that or not yet. So really
or
appreciate that.
ever. You may not see it, but that doesn't mean that you can live with yourself in the knowledge that you're doing nothing while people are screaming. You know the line in the song, Go Down Moses. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell the Pharaoh to let my people go. And then there's one line, oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. And people of Gaza oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. So it's hard to just turn your head and go on with your life. Though everybody has a right to a life, but to go on as if that's not happening and to pretend as if you're unaware of it. The song Blowing in the Wind by Bob Dylan, one of my one of the lines I liked in that song was, "How many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see?" How many times can you just pretend you don't see? No, you see. You see. Okay.
All right, Dr. Finkelstein, it was great to be with you. Thanks so much for coming on this
I
evening.
always wanted to meet Bobby Hanoi. So,
All right, we'll have to do it again sometime.
best of luck to you.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, everyone. As you can see, I am under the weather. That was a great conversation with Professor Finkelstein, Dr. Finkelstein. I am going to stay on for a little more to do one story, I think. One story. How do I sound? Do I sound all right enough for a story, or can you not take it? Because I do not sound the same. But I do have a story I would like to do, at least one to keep on. And then after this, I won't be streaming for another like 3 or 4 days. So, all right. People said I'm fine. So anyway, before I go on, that was a great conversation with Dr. Finkelstein. Funny story about him. I didn't want to waste time with too many pleasantries because we had a time limit. But I actually met Dr. Finkelstein back in 2011, 2012. I brought him to my college campus when I started to learn more about the Israel-Palestine situation, about the plight of Palestine. I learned from Arab students at my college. They got into some fights with some Israeli students, and I really was inspired to take action from what they told me and then do my own independent research. They really wanted Dr. Finkelstein to come to campus, and I did all that I could. I mean, I was just one person, but Dr. Finkelstein is a very open, pleasant, very willing to speak to whoever and however many people he can to get the message out. So we were able to successfully bring him to campus, and it was a great event. It really triggered all the Zionists, as Dr. Finkelstein tends to do, as Norman Finkelstein tends to do. And it was a great experience. So his work has been instrumental in my understanding of the struggle of the Palestinian people. And so in this moment, it was a great honor to have him on the program. With that said, everyone, do like the stream, stick around. I will do one more story. Like the stream, hit the subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. Also, YouTube is demonetizing almost everything Palestine related. You heard this correctly. Richard Medhurst, friend of the show, who I'm going to have on hopefully this month, he was completely demonetized. All my videos, whenever I say Israel, Palestine, they get demonetized. So this is a really critical time. Of course, focus your resources on the people of Gaza. I'm not too aware of the resources to get people what they need because it's a really dire situation. And we know that Israel's like literally bombing the corridors that should be getting aid into Palestine. So, but do focus your energies there. If you do have the ability and you support this work, you support independent media, do subscribe on Patreon, Substack, buy me a coffee. I know a few people became members. Hetty, Richard, thank you so much. Thanks for all the super chats. I'll get to those at the end. But please do subscribe on Patreon, Substack, or buy me a coffee. All of that is really appreciated as the censors go way up, because whenever you say Israel or Palestine, it is literally a thought crime. I mean, this has been years in the making. We know professors, we know people like Abby Martin have had to get lawsuits taken out because they've been persecuted. We know Dr. Finkelstein himself didn't even tell his story, but we know he was basically exiled out of academia because of his worldview and because of his advocacy and activism in defense of the self-determination of Palestinian people. So with all that said, please do support this program however you can. Patreon, Substack, buy me a coffee. It's all in the video description. And also do subscribe on Rumble. I'm going to put the stream from Rumble in the chat so you can find it there. You can find my page there, my Rumble page, and do follow me on Rumble. So, sorry about that. I'm gonna put in a cough drop while I do this. So, I want to do one story for all of you, okay? Um, I want to talk about actually a little more. I got Dr. Finkelstein's reaction to the United States and its situation that it finds itself in, really the neocons, and how Israel is creating kind of a public relations nightmare of sorts for the neocons. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about Blinken's visit, his failed visit. He's in Jordan now. He's going to go to Turkey. It's a nightmare for the United States. It's all political theater. I agree with Dr. Finkelstein on the one hand. I also believe that if Israel does try to complete its final solution for the Palestinians, it is a political nightmare for the United States, which has to rest upon this exceptionalism, this civilized mass murder regime that it presides over. And Israel is bursting asunder any illusions of that. So I'm going to get to that right now. Okay. Yes. And some people said Jackson Hinkle will completely eradicate from YouTube. Ridiculous. Right. So this is important. All right. Do support on all these other platforms, especially while I'm still here. So you know where to go and how you can contribute to ensuring that I can do this work. All right. So here we go. So Antony Blinken has been traveling around the Middle East of late because Israel is on a rampage. Israel has killed over 10,000 Palestinians, over 3,000 children, bombing hospitals, bombing schools. It is an absolute nightmare for Palestine right now, and it's a PR nightmare for the United States. Not because the United States isn't in unconditional solidarity with Israel. We've seen Joe Biden, Linda Thomas Greenfield veto the UN resolution for a ceasefire. We know that the United States doesn't disagree with what Israel does. We know that the United States is Israel's biggest backer, but that's not the point. The point is it's an election season. There's a lot on the line for the Biden administration. And this comes as there's one blunder after another for the foreign policy establishment, especially with regard to Ukraine. Now that Ukraine is winding down, there's talks of US officials giving the little elbow to Zelensky, saying it's time for a peace plan. There is nothing good about an open air public massacre of the Palestinian people, but that is what is happening. Even if the United States agrees with it in secret, it does not want such a thing to become worldwide attention. It does not want worldwide attention on it, but that is what has happened. And so Antony Blinken is attempting to play damage control. And how is he doing this? Well, first, he went to Israel, and I'm going to show you what he posted and what Politico is reporting. So here is Antony Blinken's Twitter page. He said he met with senior Israeli leadership today. That was November 3rd. Israel has a right to defend itself against terrorism and ensure this never happens again. We discussed concrete steps that can and should be taken to protect civilians. So Antony Blinken talking about protecting civilians is pretty rich, given that the United States has been in unconditional solidarity with Israel from the very beginning of its bombing campaign. But the hypocrisy isn't the point here. The point here is that there are indications that the United States is trying to gain and wrestle control of the situation, whether it is genuine or not, whether it is possible or not. Both could definitely be out of reach. So the U.S. asked Israel to avoid killing civilians, says Politico. Washington is reportedly pushing hard after the Jabalia bombing. So Israel's bombing of a refugee camp, one of the biggest in Gaza, killing over, I believe it was 400 Palestinians in two fell swoops, I guess you could say, because it was two huge and massive strikes. That is what is prompting Washington to grow increasingly uncomfortable with the civilian death toll in Gaza, requesting an explanation from Israel for one of the airstrikes of the densely populated Jabalia refugee camp, says Politico. The request was in context of asking Israel to do more to avoid civilian casualties. A U.S. official granted anonymity to discuss sensitive conversation, told Politico. Washington has also asked for details on the thinking and process behind the strike and urged Israel to conduct precision targeting to avoid harming civilians. Now, look, this is really political theater because, let's be honest, the United States had the ability to do this. The neocons, if they cared about, do the neocons care about civilians? No, they don't. Did they care about civilians in Iraq? No, they did not. Did they care about all the Ukrainian civilians that were forced to join the Ukrainian armed forces to go out to the front line and die on behalf of NATO? No, they didn't care. Did they care about civilians anywhere in the world, whether it's Latin America, whether it's Asia, Africa, Libya, Syria? No, they don't care about civilians. So, of course, it's theater, but it's theater that is important because it shows us that there is a public relations nightmare at the foot of the United States' door. So, visiting Israel on Friday, Antony Blinken told reporters that he would urge Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to pursue a pause in the fighting and gave him advice about reducing civilian casualties. I mean, can you imagine that conversation? What does that even look like? What are you even talking about? What advice are you giving? Antony Blinken has never waged a war. Netanyahu, to his credit, has basically waged a war on Palestinians almost every other year since he's been a politician, which is many decades now in Israel. But that's not, I don't think, a badge of honor, given that what that means is that he has literally been responsible for the murder of tens of thousands of Palestinians at this point. So while it's not a badge of honor, is to say it's interesting. It's Antony Blinken giving Netanyahu advice when Antony Blinken is not just completely ignorant of the ways of war, but also he is a terrible diplomat, a terrible Secretary of State. I mean, I said this on Twitter that I don't know how he became worse than Hillary Clinton, but this Palestine situation has essentially sowed that ranking for him. He is below Hillary Clinton, believe it or not, in effectiveness, because while Hillary Clinton was a war criminal, the queen of war crimes, as to paraphrase Tulsi Gabbard, while she definitely was that, could you imagine Hillary? I mean, I could imagine Hillary Clinton in 2016 as president pushing for war with Russia, but as Secretary of State under Obama, she had to stand next to Sergei Lavrov with the whole reset button. She had to play a game. She had to play tough with China, but also say, well, we need to work with China. She was a better diplomat than Antony Blinken. Believe it or not. That's not saying she was a good one. All right. That's not saying much at all. It is to say, though, that Antony Blinken is just the worst of the worst. So the U.S. urged Israel to conduct more surgical operations instead of a full-scale invasion of Gaza, citing civilian and IDF casualties, the potential of them, the anonymous official told Politico, but Netanyahu only partially heeded the advice. So anyway, they're just going to get into how many people have died, the Jabalia camp bombing, the damage from that. But I want to read you now what the New York Times had to say, because I think it's even worse than partial. I think Netanyahu, and here's the thing, it was probably all theater, right? It was probably all theater. It was never supposed to be something that meant much. But even the optics of Netanyahu rebuffing Blinken does make the United States look weak. It makes it look like Israel is the one pulling the punches. And of course, it's not Netanyahu is vulnerable politically to a certain extent, but let's be honest. Netanyahu has been in politics. I don't understand. We're talking, there's a lot of talk about Israel's internal political situation, which I am no expert on. But I do know Netanyahu has literally been in the game since the 1990s, if not before. I remember him co authoring the Clean Break Doctrine, which essentially is the outline for Israel's foreign policy, even beyond Palestine. This guy has been in politics for many, many years, prime minister, president, etc., etc. So to think that Netanyahu has anything to worry about when it comes to Blinken, who has been the Secretary of State for less than 4 years, and who knows, he could be very well out in 2024, is laughable. So here it says that Netanyahu appears to rebuff Blinken's request for humanitarian pauses. So that's what they're calling it. They're not calling it a ceasefire, okay? They're calling it humanitarian pauses. There's not going to be a ceasefire for Gaza, for the conflict. A humanitarian pause is all that they'll say, because to use the word ceasefire is sacrilegious, because Israel demands all prisoners of war, what they call hostages, will be released before there can be anything changing. And they don't even promise anything will change, but they'll say before any policy will change with what Israel is doing, the hostages need to be released. So shortly after American Secretary of State visited Israel and asked the country to pause fighting to allow aid into Gaza, the Prime Minister of Israel said that a ceasefire would be contingent on the release of Israeli hostages, a tough stance that seemed to be a rebuff to Washington. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel on Friday, called for a series of humanitarian pauses to allow more deliveries of badly needed food, water, medicine, and other supplies into Gaza, and also to facilitate the release of more than 200 hostages abducted from the deadly October 7 terrorist attacks Hamas launched from the enclave which it controls. I have made clear that we are continuing forcefully, and that Israel refuses a temporary ceasefire that does not include the release of our hostages, Netanyahu said. He also stood fast on Israel's refusal to let fuel enter Gaza, needed to power hospitals and power desalination plants that provide drinking water, even as it allows in limited shipments of other vital supplies. Blinken told reporters in Tel Aviv that the United States stood in solidarity with Israel, but said that in meetings with Netanyahu and other leaders, he had emphasized it matters how Israel conducted its campaign to defeat Hamas. So, there you go. I've made clear we are continuing forcefully, and that Israel refuses a temporary ceasefire that does not include the release of hostages. Essentially, this is going on for a while. You're not going to see any changes to this policy. So another failure, another diplomatic failure. And now Blinken is in Jordan trying to get the Arab countries to basically control their populations. You had Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah Hassan Saeed Hassan Nasrallah, give a speech outlining Hezbollah's position. There was a lot of hope that Hezbollah would come out and essentially declare war on Israel. I always thought that was a bit naive, but that was the hope. And I'll just pull up a few highlights from the Cradle, a great source of information, by the way, the Cradle, on what Nasrallah said. I can't pull up the whole speech, but Hassan Nasrallah said about the Americans, your fleets do not scare us, nor have they ever, and we are all set for them. All options on the Lebanese front are open, all choices on any moment. The 7th of October attack was entirely a Palestinian operation. Whoever wants to stop a regional war must quickly stop the aggression on Gaza. So a completely different tone from Hezbollah, but you see there's some convergence here in terms of what the United States and Hezbollah want. They want for different reasons, they want Israel to change its behavior. The United States wants Israel to change its behavior because the Biden administration does not want to lose any ground electorally should Israel complete its final solution extermination campaign under Biden's watch. I mean, think about this. If Gaza is ethnically cleansed 100%, which isn't necessarily a I won't call it a fact of life. I won't say it's definitely going to happen, but it's not out of the realm of possibility given the scale of Israel's bombardment right now. If Israel successfully does this under Biden's watch, that's on Biden. That's on Biden, right? So that is on Joe Biden, and Joe Biden will forever have that on his record. And don't forget that there are many Arabs, many Muslims in the US population that vote for Democrats. There are many of them. And so it would make a difference. If you think about Michigan, it could make a big difference on how voters vote. So Joe Biden does not want to see Gaza be completely wiped out, not because he cares about Palestinians, not because he cares about peace, but because he cares about the optics for an election. Now, for Hezbollah, it's completely different. Hezbollah is in solidarity with Palestine. Hezbollah has been struggling against Israel throughout the duration of this operation, beginning on October 8th, and has actually diverted a lot of Israel's resources to its border with Israel. However, Hezbollah does not want to see a regional war because that would mean, well, what do you think that would mean? That would mean a lot of casualties, a lot of damage, and it's not a surefire victory because the politics of the region are complex when you look at how the political regimes of the Arab nations and the Muslim Islamic nations, how they have taken shape in this period. So it's not a guaranteed victory. No matter what you think about the strength of Iran and Hezbollah, they are strong countries, but they're not operating on their own. They have to contend not just with whatever rabid um, nuclear situation the United States and Israel may put forth, but they also have to deal with the regional actors who are not necessarily to be trusted. So there's a lot that has to be taken into consideration, plus the fact that if a regional war happens, it essentially means the destruction of the global economy, which means multipolarity and economic integration and development essentially stops region wide. So Hezbollah wants Israel to stop and wants there to be pressure put to bear to get Israel to stop, but it is in a very difficult position. It can't just say let's all go to a war, a crusade on Israel right now, given that the consequences of that would be so dire for the entire region, and given that it is difficult to imagine such a scenario without complete overreach and overreaction from the Israeli side. Look at how Israel has responded to Hamas and the Palestinian resistance, how they have conducted themselves on October 7th. Look at that reaction. The reaction from Israel and the United States would be more. I mean, how many more fold than this, right? There would be an all-out war in the region. It could go nuclear. So it is a very delicate situation, and it is only up to Hezbollah. It's up to forces like Hezbollah to take that into consideration, because it's only them, the progressive forces in the region, that care about both Palestinian lives and regional stability. Go figure. It's not the United States and it's not Israel. Israel has damn hell had a plan for decades and decades and decades, right? Since the 1980s, even before that, of destabilizing the entire region for its own expansionist ambitions, right? You get all these Zionists triggered about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Well, Israel has wanted to expand itself from freaking Egypt into parts of Saudi Arabia. It's wanted a greater Israel that expands essentially throughout the Middle East and North Africa. So let's not act like Israel is some kind of good faith actor here, that it's some kind of victim. That is what we have to combat the most at this moment, because even in these attempts by the United States to wrestle control and stabilize the situation and give advice to Israel, it is still promoting Israel as some kind of victim nation when it is nothing of the sort. It is committing the most vile and heinous war crimes that we have ever witnessed in human history. Can you imagine that we're in this moment? It is one of the most, if we look at just the density, the scale of what's happening to Gaza, it is some of the worst war crimes that have ever happened in human history. It is to the level of what happened to the Vietnamese people. And I was just in Vietnam. It's to that level. The Vietnamese people were sprayed with Agent Orange, poisoned. I just visited so many families, so many people, generations affected by this dioxin poison that has destroyed the lives of so many. The unexploded ordinances. I saw these bombs. I saw them. I went to an organization that pulls up these bombs. I saw the damage that they've caused. And that's not even to mention the millions that were killed by these bombs. So, the United States, of course, is no stranger to these war crimes. But the point is that the scale of what's happening is at that level right now. The number of bombs that have been dropped on Gaza represent a magnitude of force bigger than the nuclear bombs dropped on Japan in World War II. That's how many bombs have been dropped on Gaza as of right now, and it hasn't even stopped. And it's not looking like it's going to stop anytime soon. So the neocons, Antony Blinken, they don't give a damn about Palestinian lives. They don't give a damn about peace, right? They don't care about anything except their narrow political ambitions. And that's why you have Antony Blinken trying to play damage control around the world. That's why he's trying to tell Netanyahu, scapegoating Netanyahu, as if Netanyahu has not been a political ally of the United States from the very beginning, as if Netanyahu hasn't done exactly what the United States has hoped he would do, which is to continue Israel's role as a military outpost for the United States in the region. That is why the United States finds Israel such a compatible so-called ally, regardless of how Israel treats the U.S. political class. I had Scott Ritter on the program, and he brought up the point that Netanyahu was in the chambers of Congress giving a speech against the Democratic Party president for Donald Trump, essentially. And no one did a thing. They made a little fuss. Oh, why was he doing that? That was kind of offensive. But no one did a thing. Why? Because Israel essentially has political control over the U.S. Congress. They have been bought and paid for. You should see the way Congress talks about Israel. People like Richie Torres of New York, you should see it, whose AIPAC is his biggest donor. This is what has happened to the United States political class. And it's not Israel necessarily pulling the strings of them. No, this is the political class being more than willing to get into business with Israel for the political and economic gains that it brings. They don't care what happens over there as long as Israel is playing the role it was meant to play since it was established first as a kind of replacement for the British Empire's control over the region. And then, of course, when the British empire lost its colonial booty after World War II, the United States, over a course of many decades, began to curry favor with Israel in order to do the same thing for itself in the modern era. And that's where we find ourselves now, with Israel conducting the most heinous evils on behalf of essentially U.S. hegemony, because Israel's never going to get its wishes. It's never going to expand from Egypt to Saudi Arabia, wherever, that greater Israel, probably never going to happen. But as long as it has the ambitions, the United States knows it can rely on it to do what it's doing to the Palestinians, to be a kind of sower of chaos and to be a buffer in the region to prevent any kind of integration and independence in the region, because everyone will have to focus on the heinous crimes of Israel and how to defend themselves, fight against them. It is the ball and chain, Israel is, to that region's prosperity and stability. And that is the truth. And that's why I get so frustrated when Palestine is talked about as this like little single issue, when the reality is what happens to Palestine is really what is happening to that entire region. There's a reason why this is going on now. There's a reason why the United States is actually more than willing to move its attention to the Middle East as the quagmire in Ukraine closes up into a loss for NATO. And it's because there is still business to do in the Middle East. There's still Iran, there's still Syria, there is still the question of Hezbollah and its influence over Lebanon and surrounding countries. There's still a lot of unfinished business in the Middle East, because the Middle East, especially the Arab countries, Iran, outside of the Arab countries, they are starting to move toward China, toward Russia, toward a multipolar future. They are looking for more economic development and peace. And there's nothing worse for that than Israel conducting a genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people. There's nothing worse than what is happening in Palestine for that. So the Palestinian people, of course, are the focus here. They're the focus of all these protests. They're the focus of people's attention, and they should be, because they're dying. They're the ones who are dying. We don't even know. There's still a lot to be verified with regard to the Israeli victims. We need to know a lot more. Haaretz came out with an article that showed less than 1,000 below the IDF number of 1,400 that were supposedly killed on the October 7th attack. But not only this, we know that Israel has been killing a lot of its own. We know that more hostages, or prisoners of war, we should call them, have been killed by Israel even in the last few days. So we don't know the full extent of the story, but we do know, and we do know it's documented, the Palestinians are dying in huge numbers. And so, of course, that should be the focus. But there's also many things happening at once, and that is the multipolar world is still under siege. It's still being attacked by all means, right? All means, it is being attacked at all levels. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention to that too, because that's the big picture here. The big picture is Arab countries, Muslim majority countries, these countries in this part of the global south of West Asia, they are being held back by this military outpost, this settler colony called Israel. And that settler colony right now is out of control. In the United States, the neocons can't get it under control, nor do they really want to. But even just for the optics, humanitarian pause, hey, kill a little fewer. They can't even get that done, because there is no respect for the U.S. administration. Why should there be respect? It's a declining empire. Everyone is on their own now. So some are charting a multipolar future. Israel is charting what it sees as its future, which is the final solution. Let's grab everything we can while the going is good, as quick as possible. This is the historical moment we're in. That's why the intensity of this is so magnified. The scale of this is just enormous. And we need to make sure that we're elevating this to the highest level possible of analysis and understanding, because without that, we are lost. And in this moment, we need more clarity now more than ever. So, with that said, the neocons are going to do what they do. The foreign policy establishment is going to do what it does. But the point is that we need to be making sure that we're elevating not just Palestinian self-determination, but the role of Israel as a whole and what function it serves geopolitically for the United States, for the hegemon, and for the region. All right, everyone. That's the story. That's the story. I had one for you. I could go on and on and on, of course. I have a lot to say on this, but you want to, I don't know if you noticed my image here. I got this out in Texas, actually. I believe I got this either in San Antonio or Austin. I mean, it's great. The artistry. Oh, hold on. Did my picture just freeze? Am I still there? That was very strange. I don't know if you see the painting here. It's an incredible one. Breaking through the wall. You see the key, the right of return, self-determination for Palestine. It says, I've had that up there since the beginning. I don't know if anyone noticed it before. I hope you see it and notice it now. It's a great painting. But with that said, everyone, I have a few announcements. Then I may ramble on a little bit more because it is still quite early and I know I need some rest, but there's no rest for the weak and weary. And my conversation with Finkelstein was amazing, but it was too short. So you know me, I like to go for a little bit. So Juji Liang said, am I doing this full time? I'm actually still only able to do it part time, but I'm trying to make sure, especially as the censors go up, that I build up the support. So please buy me a coffee. Please go to Patreon, subscribe as a paid member for a year if you can, because that's the best way. Substack the same way. So if you can do all that, pardon me. If you can do all that, please do. Please do support, because I am trying to build up to the capacity to do this 2/3 time and maybe full time. But right now it's half time. And after 100,000 subscribers, I gotta say, when I was away in Vietnam, I'm gonna tell you all a story. Let me tell you a story about what happened in Vietnam. I have a theme song that I play before every stream, and at the end of each video, I usually have a little bit of a clip of me saying, hey, please support this show, and the song is playing. YouTube was copyright claiming that song, even though it is a free song, but they were copyright claiming it anyway, saying that that artist is now a part of some media group that is a YouTube media group, and they're all copyright claiming it if you don't give the right credit. I never had to give credit before. I've been doing this for a year, 2 years. I've had that song playing, and then suddenly every single video, day after day after day, I had to correct the claim. I've spent a lot of time correcting claims because they're targeting me. I mean, they are. I mean, I had like 15, 20 over the course of my trip to Vietnam. It was ridiculous. They were basically trying to get rid of my channel, in my opinion. And then ever since, I've been talking about Palestine, Israel, of course, everything has been limited or demonetized. So with that said, I was warned, 100,000 subscribers, get ready. Here I am, 100,000 subscribers, complaining about constantly being demonetized, and it's probably going to get worse as things go on. So with that said, you do want to support on Patreon, Substack, buy me a coffee. I have my Rumble as well, which I'll put in the chat. I'll put my Rumble stream where you can follow me there. But those places to follow me as a paid member is the best way. Substack, Buy Me a Coffee, or Patreon. All right. All right. Back. I'm back. That was my fault. I think I kicked my Ethernet cord out. Am I back? Back? All right. I should be back. Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm back, right? All right. Kind of, people say. Let me see something here. Yeah, I'm back. I'm back. All right, everybody. All right, everybody. I'm back. So I want to just give you a few announcements. Some say I'm blurry, which is annoying, I guess. But next stream, okay, November 8th. Next stream is November 8th. I can reload. I'm gonna reload because you know what? I can do that. I'll be right back. All right. All right, I'm back. I'm back. Am I less blurry now? Let me know. All right. Anyway, so I have a few announcements, okay? October 8th, Brian Berletic and I will be Brian Berletic will join me for a stream to return to our usual Ukraine. We'll probably talk about Palestine as well. How can we not talk about Palestine? We talk about Ukraine, the Belt and Road Forum, China. You know the deal. So we'll do our general conversation October 8th. We're actually going to move to evening my time, morning his time for a little bit of a change. So be on the lookout October 8th. October 10th in my morning Eastern time, Pepe Escobar will be joining me to talk about very similar things. He's had a lot to say about what's going on in Palestine, but also he will come on to talk about the Belt and Road Forum. I believe he was in China during the Belt and Road Forum. So I will have him on to talk about that. So those are the next two streams, really. And then I'll probably do some more solo stuff. I haven't really done a solo stream in a while, not since Vietnam. I've been kind of trying to get into the swing of things. When I got sick, I thought, you know what? I can't do this for 2 hours without some help. So I called on some of my most trusted people on this question. And so I hope it's been good. All right. Oof. I'm sick, everyone. I'm sick. So those are the two big announcements. Okay. It's going to be a busy month of streaming content because this is a really this is just a situation that deserves attention. It's that dire, and it's also that important to everything. When it comes to Palestine, I'm going to repeat, Palestine is not by itself. Hezbollah stands in solidarity with Palestine. Yemen stands in solidarity with Palestine. Iran stands in solidarity with Palestine. Syria stands in solidarity with Palestine. Bolivia stands in solidarity with Palestine. The majority of the world's countries actually do stand in solidarity with Palestine. It really is the United States and Israel that are the rogue regimes. They are the ones who are dictating this, and they are doing it not just with a plan for Palestine and the millions of Palestinians who are suffering under bombardment, blockades, and terror, but they are also doing it for regional and global concerns and aims, namely to ensure that the Middle East becomes a buffer of containment for Russia and China. I've been saying this for a long time now that the region of West Asia, what's known as the Middle East in the colonial tongue, I've been saying that this region no longer is just about this region. Sure, during the war on terror, during the General Wesley Clark's, oh, we're going to destroy 7 countries after 9/11, which what Donald Rumsfeld told him when he was when he was a NATO general. Sure, at that time, 2001, 2003, 5, 7, you could say it's about the oil. It's about ensuring the United States maintains its hegemonic status, expands its influence. You could have said that and been okay. But now we live in a different period. We live in a period of great power confrontation. We live in a multipolar epoch, which means that everything that the United States does, everything that the collective West does, has its sights on Russia and China, because these are the countries that are charting a path forward for the world to break out of the unipolar order. So they are the ones that are building peaceful relations. They are the ones adhering to international law on the Palestine question, okay? That they are the ones. They're the Russia's statements, how Russia's behaving. They are pushing forward with an actual ceasefire resolution. That's what they want. They were in support of the ceasefire resolution that Linda Thomas Greenfield rejected. Excuse me. Yes, it's epoch. Epoch. Epic. I'm from Boston. I have an accent. So anyway, that's the point here. The point here is that this really is about the United States and whichever of its proxies, Israel being one, organizing them to do the bidding. And sometimes the bidding is not even bidding, because Israel, I believe, has a huge independent streak, but what it does fits within the realm of US strategic objectives for the world. China, Russia, they want to integrate. They want the region of West Asia to be prosperous. They want sound relations with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, with every country in the region. They don't want any wars in that region. Now you could say, hey, Danny, that's naive. That doesn't take into account context. Sure, you could say that. But they understand that it's only the people of that region that can determine the destiny of that region. And that's the difference between how Russia and China operate and how the United States and Israel operates. The United States and Israel operate to ensure that their interests are met in a region where they don't even belong. And I know that might be controversial to say, but I'm sorry. Israel doesn't belong in that region as a government. There will be an order there. There will be some kind of social order there eventually. You're not going to expel, I don't believe this is going to happen. You're not going to expel all the Jews that have settled in that region. No, you're not going to do that. But Palestinians, under the international law, have the right to return. And nobody says that a state is a given. States change all the time. At one point, the Republic of China exiled government was the representative at the United Nations, right? So just because the state of Israel is considered a sovereign country now, as it is currently constituted, doesn't mean it's not going to change, especially if Israel itself and the United States continue to reject the two-state solution, which is international law. That's international law. That's the framework that every country is supposed to support, including Israel, to get that. That was what was supposed to, but it didn't happen, and it's not going to happen because Israel is trying to eliminate all Palestinians. That's why it's not going to happen. There's not going to be justice of any kind in that way. So we're not even certain of what the future will look like, but we are certain of is that what Israel is doing serves to sow chaos, to distort and destroy any capability for this region to prosper. This includes Palestinian people, just their right to life being completely stripped from them. But this also includes the rest of the region. It hurts countries like Yemen, which just had its own humanitarian catastrophe. Now they feel compelled to enter the war on behalf of their Palestinian brothers and sisters, mothers, fathers, comrades. They feel compelled to enter the war, but they're depleted. They need to develop their country. Iran. Iran wants out of sanctions. It wants to be prosperous and stable. It just normalized with Saudi Arabia, right as Saudi Arabia was trying to normalize with Israel. Iran has been trying to delicately play the diplomacy game so that it can integrate into the region and prosper itself. Syria just rejoined the Arab League. It wants to stabilize. It wants independence. It wants to stop all the wars. It does not want any more war. It's had a war target on its back for more than 12 years. So we're talking about a situation where these countries don't want a regional war. They don't want to struggle and fight and destroy the Zionist entity. Maybe they do in their heads, but they don't want to do that right now in a moment where what they really need is economic prosperity and the right to life. Palestinians deserve that. Syrians deserve that. Iranians deserve that. They all deserve that. Why is it the United States and Israel are the ones that are attempting to prevent all of this? They are the wrecking balls of the region. No one else. Hamas is the Nazis. Stop it. Just stop it. It's disgusting. First of all, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous comparison. But even I have been a bit disappointed in some of the undue focus on even an organization like Hamas. Like, look, Hamas is politically diverse. It has a lot of contradictions. I'm aware of its history. But if you don't understand that the principal contradiction here is Palestinians dying in the region, getting torn into pieces, and Hamas is really small in terms of its role and all of that. And you could argue positive or negative on all these fronts when it comes to just Hamas alone. So the real thing that I want to focus on, that's why I look forward to talking to some of these folks coming up, is this larger question of where Palestine falls in the whole global order. Because the global order is what is being destabilized by Israel's behavior. It's not just the Palestinian people. And that's why the Palestinian people need to be talked about in a global context, because they need global solidarity. No people, Vietnam could never have won against the French, against the Japanese, against the United States without international solidarity, without nations and people around the world. I went to the War Remnants Museum. You go to the War Remnants Museum and you will see an entire display of global solidarity in countries, the Soviet Union, China, everywhere across Asia, across Africa, Algeria, you name the country, and there are massive demonstrations, massive levels of support. That's what Palestine needs. And of course, it's going to need regional allies to also step up when it is feasible and possible, because isn't always feasible. It isn't always possible. The Soviet Union and China supported Vietnam at very different periods, at very different ways, at very different times. Cuba the same way. So Vietnam would not have been able to win without all of it. Hell, the United States was supporting Vietnam during its fight against the Japanese. Ho Chi Minh was hanging out with the CIA. That doesn't mean Ho Chi Minh was a reactionary, but they were fighting against the Japanese because the United States was then going to look to get its foothold there, but it wanted to support the strongest forces at the time. So this is what it calls for. There's going to be contradictions. There are going to be issues. But the biggest point we have to make is that Palestine, the Palestinian people, need our unconditional solidarity. They are the ones who are going to determine their destiny. They're the ones who are going to determine which form of leadership is going to lead them to any kind of prospect for independence and self-determination. It's them, not us. Not us. We need to be concerned about how many children, how many people are being killed. We need to be concerned about how our governments, the United States, the collective West, how they're playing huge roles in this war criminality, in this war crime of the century. That's what we need to be concerned about. That's what geopolitics, I believe, really is. It's about understanding the world situation so you can change it. Understanding the world situation so you can take a stand, a real stand. Not just saying, oh, well, you know, Hamas and Israel created Hamas and Hamas is this and that. Yeah, all that stuff could be true. But at the same time, if Palestinians feel like Hamas is the organization that is best equipped and best suited to help them defend themselves from Israeli terror, I can't judge them. Same with Afghanistan. Is the Taliban ideologically aligned with Danny Dhaiphong? Probably not. Am I going to judge the people of Afghanistan who are under occupation from the United States, a brutal occupation? Am I going to blame them for taking up arms with the Taliban? No, I'm not going to blame them, because it was the only force that was thrust upon them. Remember the dirty wars of the late 1970s, thrust upon them by the United States itself to fight the Soviet Union. So, am I going to blame people for making these choices under conditions I could never even understand? I can't even understand. Most of us can't who are watching this. Maybe some of you. Salute if you can understand. But I can't even understand the conditions that people of Afghanistan, of Palestine, of countries of that sort have had to deal with. I just went to Vietnam, and now Vietnam is a semi-modern country. It's on its way toward modernization, and even then, I read the history. I saw it up close. I saw the organizations doing the work out there, but I still can't really understand it, because you know what? They've made such rapid progress. They're kind of out now in a different stage of development. And so when I when I looked at the Coochie tunnels and I saw what people had to do, it's hard to even imagine what that was like, to basically live in tunnels and attack from the ground, what like Hamas is doing right now, what Palestinians are doing right now, to fight an enemy so formidable that you have to build 150 miles worth of tunnels, which is what the Vietnamese did in order to fight back. That's not only ingenuity and courage, and it's just incredible, but it also shows how hard, how difficult, how challenging geopolitics in action really is when we're talking about a situation like Palestine, which is truly about self-determination. It's truly about the future of an oppressed people. It's easy when it's China, right? When you think, oh, well, China, look how modern it is. Look how assertive it is. Look how influential it is. Yeah, that may seem easy now, but watch the battle of Lake Changjin. Watch it. Watch that movie about the volunteers who went to Korea to fight on behalf of the Korean struggle against the United States invasion. Not an easy task, incredibly difficult, and you can just imagine that those challenges were just as grave during the fight against the KMT and the U.S.-backed KMT, the Japanese during World War II. I mean, we're talking about untold horrors that were committed, right? And that were experienced. So it's not a dinner party, right? Geopolitics is not a dinner party. World politics is not a dinner party. We are witnessing in real time a massacre that is all about a struggle for self-determination that is now being attempted or is now being attacked in a way where there's a campaign of total destruction against it. So that's the moment of history we're in. You got me on I don't know where I went with this. I guess the under the weather mentality has me going on and on and on. But these are just some of the things that I've been thinking about since I've gotten back from Vietnam. Even before then, when I was in Vietnam, I was only able to do a few individual videos. It was driving me nuts. I didn't have that much time. I was talking for like 20, 30 minutes at a time in these individual videos because I had to keep things short. I had a schedule, it was a delegation, so I had a schedule. I was with my wife and her mom, and it was a thing, and it was really eating me inside because this was happening to Palestine. The world situation was on fire. Ukraine was becoming an afterthought, and I was thinking, wow, everything is changing. And here I am having a blast, seeing things that I need to see. And it's incredibly useful. And I'm glad I did it because in this moment, I think we need to remember the successes of Vietnam and countries like it to understand the Palestine situation even better. But at the same time, it was eating me inside to be like, wow, all this stuff is happening. I can't report. And so I've been having a lot of thoughts coming in, and I appreciate all of you for bearing with me and hearing me talk about them. And I hope that they bear some fruit for you and are useful to you in some way or another. But with that said, I really can't talk anymore. All right, everybody. I'm going to do a quick super chat rundown. Thank you, Hedy Lukil, for the membership. Appreciate that. Thank you so much, Richard Morrow, for the membership. Thank you to Tarana Ahmadi Parker for the super chat. Thank you, Jim A, for the super chat. Danny Norman, always. Thank you. David, thank you so much for the super chat. Marta K, thank you so much for the super chat. AP6912, thank you so much for the super sticker. Rennie, thank you so much for the super sticker. Kenneth Topping said, thank you, Danny, for your amazing work. I don't like to deify people, but if I were, Norman Finkelstein would be at the top, courageous and full of integrity. Man, and he's got a sense of humor, too. I mean, he really got a kick out of my name, Danny Haiphong. A lot of people in Vietnam got a kick out of my name, too. So he keeps calling me Bobby Hanoi. Muntasir Kainat, $3. Thank you so much for the super sticker. Akram, thank you so much for the super sticker. Jayan says, interview with Shiva Ayudari, the only presidential candidate speaking out against the collective punishment and genocide. I don't know this person. I'm sorry. Do send me information though. Okay. You can leave a comment on this video if you don't have any other way to reach me. Thank you. So Nadia says it's being unsinkable aircraft carrier to guard oil and funnel rubbish to end the world and bring Jesus back are too rarely spoken of. People don't often add inferring motives to the Western proxy factor. It being an unsinkable aircraft carrier to guard oil and fundy rubbish to end the world and bring Jesus back are too rarely spoken of. People don't often add inferring motives to the Western proxy factor. Wow. Thank you so much. Time for a cup of hot apple cider with a couple of slices of lime, Danny. Thanks for the advice. I wish I had all of those things. Now, I'm a tea guy. Probably make some tea. Start packing in for the evening. My pup is snuggled up. So I'm probably going to just snuggle up and I'm on the up and up, though. I don't predict myself being sick by the time I talk to Brian. Knock on myself, knock on wood over there. I don't predict it because even though I sound bad today, I know I don't sound my best. If you heard me with Scott, I sounded worse with Scott. I know that for a fact. I felt worse with Scott. I felt not myself with Scott. So people are talking about Finkelstein's humor. Yes. No, I mean I would love to just be friends with him. I mean, he's an incredible mind. The experience, you can tell he's been through it all, from the scholarship, the activism, people like that. Like I've been lucky enough to meet people like that to some degree. There are not so many, especially of those of generations after my own, ahead of my own. There are not that many left. So, we really got to cherish people like Norman Finkelstein, who has all this knowledge, but also has been, he's seen things, he's done things. And we don't meet many scholars like him anymore. Most scholars are what you would call detached. He is not detached from anything. He is attached, right? And his disdain for people who are detached. I really vibe with that because I can't stand academics, scholars, politicians, anybody, activists, anyone, ordinary people, not ordinary, but like, people out in the world, lay people, just detached from their surroundings, from their settings, I'm not even talking about alienated, not alienated from our labor in the Marxist sense. Oh, we produce things or work and we don't see the fruits and all. No, 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 no. Worse than that. We're talking about people who literally, because of their status, their position, whether it's their fault or not, usually it's a combination of sorts, they are detached. And I mean, I can sniff a person out like that from a mile away, but I also just can't stand it. Like it's just not who I am. So, talking to someone like Norman Finkelstein is definitely refreshing. With that said, everyone. All right. So, people talk about Scott Ritter. Look, it's so funny. Scott, we are not the same person. Like I would never call myself an American patriot. I love America, all that stuff. But he does. And you would think, oh, well, Danny, how about your American socialist patriotism debate back in the past? Look, Scott Ritter's doing stuff. Like he is speaking out in ways that are not only important, but his analysis is spot on. And you know what? The framing can be helpful for people who need to hear it. So what I can't adopt that framework of, hey, I love America, but America doesn't love this and that. I can't do that framing, but someone like Scott, it's effective. So I have no problem with it. I'm not even critical of it because I believe it does much more of a service given just the way that he talks about things, his positions, his understanding, his analysis. Because of that, I mean, he is a friend of this show. That I would put him at like if we had tiers, he would be at the top level friend because he he walks the walk, man, and his analysis, not just on Ukraine but on global developments, is spot on, and no one's perfect. I'm not perfect. I have my flaws, but certainly, we get along just fine because of the function. Um, Someone pulled the plug on me. All right. All right, all right, all right. Let's see. All right, everybody. I'm out of here. September 8th. September 8th. That's how you know I'm all not here. November 8th. Brian Berletic. That'll probably be 9 p.m. Eastern time. November. I keep saying September. Oh my God. November 8th. Save the date. That's the next stream. November 10th, the morning. I think it'll be 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Pepe Escobar. Those are the next two streams. There'll be clips in between then. And before you go, make sure you hit the like button. Subscribe if you're new. Hit the notifications bell. I'm just going to tell you to do that because it could help or it could not. Then support the channel, okay? Because the demonetization is coming. I mean, they got me thinking about changing titles all the time on my videos. It's getting ridiculous with the Palestine stuff. So, do support Patreon, Substack, Buy Me a Coffee. Those are the three best options for paid membership. I mean, Buy Me a Coffee is more one time, but there's a tier there if you want to do a tier. You can become a YouTube member as well. So those four options: YouTube membership, Buy Me a Coffee for a one-time option, Substack you can do annually, Patreon you can do annually. Those are the best annual memberships because you can sustain someone. And hopefully it doesn't break your bank either because you just pay one time, almost like a gift. And then, of course, there's PayPal in the video description and other one-time options, okay? So that being said, everybody, I am going to leave. Oh, someone said Rockfin. Yes, I'm on Rockfin. Sorry if I forget Rockfin sometimes because hold on one second. Did Rockfin continue? Okay, yeah, I'm still on Rockfin. I'll just post a stream link in the chat. I'm on Rockfin. Sorry, I forget. I don't even know if I put the right thing in there for all of you. Hold on one second. All right, Rockfin is a little finicky. I gotta say, the interfaces for the new things. I love independent media, but Rock. So I posted the Rockfin in the chat. Follow there. Follow Rumble. All right, Rumble is my main backup at this moment. I just got on it. So there you go in the chat. All right, everybody. Um all right, everybody. Take good care. Salute. Red salute. Norman Finkelstein's more pessimistic than I am. Maybe it's my youth, but I am an optimist. I like to consider myself a revolutionary optimist. So while the situation is grim in Palestine, while the world situation has marked instability, do not forget that there are decades where nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. I believe I'm paraphrasing Vladimir Lenin, although it's hard to find where that quote came from, but it's a great one nonetheless. A lot can happen. I think the courage and ingenuity of the Palestinian people out of this showed that Israel is not infallible. The United States is not all dominant. The world is building anew, and we have to remain steadfast and maintain, even if it's not optimism, because I'm not rebuking Finkelstein here, Norman Finkelstein here. I think we can be pessimistic when it's appropriate. But I also think it can be appropriate to understand that the arc of history and the development of history is not only not linear, but oftentimes moves in the direction of progress. And we just have to be willing to see it, to look for it, and to be part of it. All right. Take good care, everybody. I will see you all again November 8th. Hopefully, all of this will be gone by then. I'll be working hard on that. Like the stream, hit the subscribe button, notifications bell, go to the links in the video description to support this work. And I will see you all again next time. Bye-bye.